I died in my car on a Tuesday afternoon, and what my mother showed me in the light changed everything I thought I knew about loneliness. The steering wheel was cold under my palms. I remember that. I remember the specific texture of the leather, worn smooth in the center where my thumbs always rested during the commute I'd made 1,000 times before. I remember the smell of stale coffee in the cup holder, 3 days old. I remember the way the sunlight hit the windshield at that particular angle, creating a glare that made me squint. What I don't remember, what I've spent every moment since trying to piece together, is the exact second when everything I believed about my life shattered. They say that before you die, your life flashes before your eyes. That's not quite right. It's more like your life expands, becomes three-dimensional, reveals corners and shadows you never knew existed. And in those corners, in those shadows, are the truths you spent your whole life running from. My mother had been dead for 7 years when I saw her again. 7 years of silence. 7 years of conversations I'd never have. 7 years of growing older without her there to witness it, to comment on my graying hair or my tired eyes or the way I'd started to look more and more like her. 7 years of loneliness I didn't even know I was carrying. The intersection was empty. I remember checking. Left, right, left again. The light was green. Everything was clear. Everything was safe. But safety is an illusion we tell ourselves to keep moving forward. I pressed the accelerator, and in the space between that moment and the next, in the fraction of a second before metal met metal and glass became 1,000 daggers of light, I had one thought. I'm so tired of being alone. I didn't know then that this exhaustion, this bone-deep weariness, was about to be explained in a way that would break me and rebuild me simultaneously. I didn't know that my mother was waiting. I didn't know that her arms would hold the answer to a question I'd been too afraid to ask. But I knew even before the impact, that something fundamental was about to change. The sound came first. 3 months before the crash, I started eating dinner standing up at the kitchen counter. It wasn't a conscious decision. One evening, I'd heated up leftovers and, instead of sitting at the dining table, that oak table my mother had loved, the one she'd insisted I take after she died, I'd simply stood there, fork in hand, staring at the refrigerator while I chewed. The next night I did it again. And then it became the routine. The table collected mail. Bills, mostly. Advertisements for things I'd never buy. A postcard from my sister in Denver. Wish you were here. With a picture of mountains I'd never see. The postcard sat there for 6 weeks before I finally threw it away. Her handwriting a small accusation I passed every morning on my way to the coffee maker. I worked from home. Graphic design. Freelance. It meant I could go days without speaking to another human being out loud. Sometimes I'd catch myself talking to the coffee maker or the computer screen, my voice sounding strange and unused, like an instrument that had been put away too long. "Come on, render faster," I'd mutter at the screen. The silence would swallow the words immediately. My mother used to call every Sunday. 9 a.m., like clockwork. The phone would ring and I'd let it go to voicemail first, not because I didn't want to talk to her, but because I'd needed that moment to prepare myself, to put on the voice, the daughter voice, the everything is fine voice. After the third ring, I'd pick up. "Hi, Mom. There's my girl," she'd say, and I'd hear the smile in it. We'd talk about nothing, the weather, her garden, a show she'd watched, my latest project, though I'd learned to keep those descriptions brief because she'd never quite understood what I did for a living. "You make pictures on computers," she'd summarize, and I'd say yes, something like that. But underneath the nothing, there was something. Always something unspoken. A question she never asked. "Are you happy?" And an answer I never gave. I don't remember how to be. The Sunday calls stopped 7 years ago. Lung cancer. 6 months from diagnosis to funeral. I'd driven home. The real home. The house I'd grown up in. For the last 2 weeks. I'd sat beside her bed and held her hand, and listened to her breathing become shallower and shallower until it stopped. At the funeral, people kept saying how peaceful she looked. She didn't look peaceful. She looked absent. The shell of a person. The physical matter that remained when everything essential had departed. I'd stood there, staring at her and felt nothing. Not sadness, not grief, just a vast echoing absence, like a room that had been emptied of furniture and left to echo. my sister had cried. My father, they'd been divorced 20 years, had cried. Cousins and aunts and people whose names I'd forgotten had cried. I'd stood there dry-eyed and wondered what was wrong with me. Now, standing at my kitchen counter with lukewarm pasta in a plastic container, I understood. I hadn't been unable to grieve. I'd been too lonely to know how. Loneliness isn't just being alone. It's being alone inside yourself. It's having feelings that have nowhere to go, experiences that no one witnesses, thoughts that circle and circle without ever landing. It's eating dinner standing up because sitting at a table, alone, would force you to acknowledge the emptiness of the chair across from you. The night before the crash, I'd dreamed about my mother's house. Not the sterile place it had become in her final weeks, with hospital equipment and the smell of disinfectant, but the house from my childhood. Sunlit, warm, the kitchen always filled with something cooking, bread or soup, or her famous apple crisp that she'd make every fall without fail. In the dream, I'd walk through every room, running my fingers along walls and furniture, and everything had felt saturated with a feeling I couldn't name. Safety, maybe, or belonging, or simply being seen. I'd woken up with tears on my face, which startled me because I couldn't remember the last time I'd cried. The clock had read 3:47 a.m. I'd lain there in the dark, my own breathing the only sound, and thought about my mother's hands, how she'd used to cup my face when I was upset, her palms warm against my cheeks, how she'd look at me with this expression, not pity, not even sympathy, but recognition, like she could see through all my defenses to the frightened child still living somewhere inside. "You're okay," she'd say, just that. "You're okay." And for those moments, I'd believed her. The morning of the crash, I'd gone through my routine on autopilot. Coffee, shower. The graphic design project that was due by Friday, still unfinished. I'd worked for 3 hours, barely noticing the time passing, barely noticing anything at all. At noon, I'd realized I'd forgotten to eat breakfast. At 1, I'd decided to drive to the grocery store. Not because I needed groceries. My refrigerator was full of food I wasn't eating. But because I needed to leave the apartment. Needed to be around other humans, even if I didn't speak to them. Even if I was just pushing a cart through fluorescent-lit aisles, pretending to care about which brand of cereal to buy. I'd locked the door behind me, taken the stairs instead of the elevator, gotten into my car, a sedan, gray, 8 years old, unremarkable in every way. Started the engine. Pulled out of the parking space. Driven toward the intersection where everything would end and, paradoxically, finally begin. I never made it to the grocery store. But what I didn't know yet, what I couldn't have known, was that I'd been driving toward this moment my entire life. Every choice, every disappointment, every small surrender to the loneliness that had been growing inside me like a second skeleton, had been leading here, to this intersection, to this collision, to my mother's arms waiting in the light. The truck came from my left. I saw it, for maybe a second, maybe less. A flash of red metal, too close, too fast. My foot slammed on the brake, but physics had already made its calculations. The steering wheel jerked in my hands. Time stretched and compressed simultaneously. There was no time to be afraid. There was only time to understand that this was happening, that it was too late, that everything was about to change in ways I couldn't begin to comprehend. The impact sounded like the world splitting open. Metal shrieked. Glass exploded. The airbag deployed with a violence that punched the air from my lungs. My head snapped sideways. I felt my neck strain, heard something in my spine make a sound it shouldn't make. The seatbelt locked across my chest with enough force to crack something, though I wouldn't know what until later, until doctors would use words like fractured sternum, and internal bleeding, and miracle. But in that moment, there was only sensation. Only the physics of collision. Only my body being thrown against forces it was never designed to withstand. The car spun, or I think it spun. Direction lost meaning. Up and down became the same thing. The windshield turned into a spider web of fractured glass, light refracting through 1,000 cracks, creating patterns that would have been beautiful if they weren't the last thing I might ever see. And then, in the midst of the chaos, a memory invaded, sharp and uninvited and absolutely clear. I was 7 years old. My mother was braiding my hair for school. Her fingers were gentle, working through tangles without pulling. She was humming something. I couldn't remember the song now, but I remembered the feeling of it. Vibrations against my back. The smell of her perfume. Something floral that I'd never been able to identify, that had disappeared with her. "You're going to do beautiful things," she'd said. I'd asked what she meant. "I don't know yet," she'd answered, "but I know it's true." The memory vanished as quickly as it had come. The car stopped moving. Everything stopped moving. The sudden absence of motion was more shocking than the impact itself. Silence rushed in, but it wasn't really silence. I could hear things. A hissing sound. Steam or fluid leaking. The distant wail of car alarms. My own breathing, rapid and shallow. A ringing in my ears that sounded like the universe holding one long note. I tried to assess the damage. Wiggled my fingers. They worked. Tried to move my legs. Pain shot up from my left ankle, sharp enough to make spots dance in my vision. My chest felt compressed, like someone had wrapped iron bands around my ribs and was slowly tightening them. Something warm was dripping down my face. I touched it with my fingers, brought them back. Red. So much red. "Help," I tried to say, but it came out as a whisper, barely a breath. And then I noticed something strange. The pain was starting to feel distant. Not gone, but removed. Like it was happening to someone else's body and I was just observing. The iron bands around my chest were still there, but they felt less urgent somehow. Less real. My vision blurred, sharpened, blurred again. The dashboard in front of me seemed to pulse with my heartbeat, which I could feel now, rapid and irregular, like a drum being played by someone who'd forgotten the rhythm. I thought about my apartment, about the mail piling up on the dining table, about the unfinished design project that would never be completed, about my sister in Denver who would have to come back again, for another funeral, sooner than she'd expected. I thought about dying alone. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd been alone for so long that dying in a crashed car on a random Tuesday seemed almost appropriate. Poetic even, in a dark way. But then another thought came, unexpected and devastating in its simplicity. I never got to tell her. Tell her what? Tell her that I'd spent 7 years missing her. That the loneliness had started long before she died, but her death had made it absolute. That I'd pushed her away during those Sunday phone calls, because being close to anyone, even her, had felt like too much risk. That I'd stood at her funeral, unable to cry. Not because I didn't care, but because I cared too much and had forgotten how to let anyone see it. Tell her that I was sorry. Tell her that I was lost. Tell her that I didn't know how to be a person anymore, just a function. A machine that went through motions. A ghost haunting her own life. My breathing was getting harder. Each inhale took more effort. The air felt thick, resistant, like trying to breathe underwater. The ringing in my ears had become a roar. Somewhere far away, I heard sirens. Somewhere closer, I heard voices. People who'd seen the crash, who were running toward my car, who were shouting things I couldn't quite make out. But all of it was fading, dimming, like someone was slowly turning down the volume on the world. My last conscious thought was this: if I die right now, I'll die without anyone really knowing me. And then the darkness came. But it wasn't darkness. It was something else entirely. I was above my body. That's the first thing I understood. I was looking down at myself, at the wreckage of my car, at my head slumped against the deployed airbag, blood matting my hair, and I felt curious, detached, like watching a movie where I was the main character but also the audience. 2 people were at my car door, yanking on it. A man in a business suit, his tie askew. A woman in workout clothes, her phone pressed to her ear. Their mouths were moving, but I couldn't hear them. Or I could hear them, but the sound was muffled, as if traveling through water. "She's not responding. Is she breathing? The ambulance is coming, hold on." I wanted to tell them I was fine, that I was right here, but I couldn't make them hear me, and besides, I wasn't sure it was true. Was I fine? My body down there certainly didn't look fine. More people gathered. A small crowd forming at a safe distance. Everyone holding phones. Everyone filming. Documenting. Turning my death, or near death, I wasn't sure which yet, into content. I tried to feel angry about it, but I couldn't. The emotion wouldn't stick. Everything felt smooth, frictionless, like trying to hold water in my hands. Then I saw her. My mother. She was standing at the edge of the crowd, but she wasn't part of it. She was, how do I explain this? More there than the others. More solid, more vivid. While everyone else looked washed out, slightly transparent, she looked fully present, as if she were the only real thing, and everything else was just a projection. She was wearing the blue cardigan she'd loved, the one she'd worn so often that the elbows had worn thin. Her hair was the way I remembered it from before the cancer. Thick, silver, pulled back in a loose bun. She was looking at my body in the car, and her expression, oh God, her expression. It wasn't sadness, exactly. It was knowledge, recognition. Like she'd been expecting this. Like she'd been waiting. Our eyes met. Or they should have met. Except I didn't have eyes anymore. Not really. And yet I could see her seeing me. Could feel her attention like a physical touch. She smiled. Not a happy smile. A knowing one. A yes, here we are smile. A finally smile. And then she turned and started walking away from the crash site. And I found myself following her. Not walking. There was no walking. No feet touching ground. But moving with intention. My awareness following hers. The world around us began to change. The crash site didn't disappear so much as become irrelevant. The edges of reality softened, blurred, reorganized themselves into something else. The sirens that had been growing louder suddenly cut off, replaced by a different kind of sound. A hum, a resonance, like standing inside a bell the moment after it's been struck. Light appeared ahead of us, but calling it light feels inadequate. It was light the way the sun is light, the way stars are light. Not just photons hitting receptors, but something alive, something conscious, something that saw you and knew you and welcomed you. My mother was ahead of me, walking into the light, and I followed because what else was I going to do? This was my mother who'd been gone for 7 years, my mother who I'd failed to properly mourn, my mother who I'd kept at arm's length even when she was alive because I'd been so terrified of needing anyone. The light embraced us, and I stopped being afraid. Actually, that's not quite right. I didn't stop being afraid because of some cosmic intervention. I stopped being afraid because suddenly, fear seemed beside the point. Like a coat I'd been wearing that I'd finally been given permission to take off. We were in a space, or maybe we were the space. I can't quite articulate it. There were no walls, no ceiling, no floor, and yet there was structure. There was intention. There was presence. Other people were there. Or beings, or consciousnesses. I could sense them without seeing them, feel them without touching them. A congregation of attention, all of it warm, all of it accepting, all of it saying the same thing in 1,000 different ways. You belong here. But I couldn't focus on them because my mother was turning toward me, and she was opening her arms, and this is the part I've struggled to explain. The part that changed everything. When she hugged me, I remembered every moment I'd been lonely, not as separate memories, as one single extended experience. It all hit me at once. Every night I'd eaten dinner standing at the counter, every time I'd let the phone ring without answering, every conversation I'd had where I'd said, I'm fine, while dying inside, every moment of connection I'd avoided because vulnerability felt like dying, every wall I'd built, every defense I'd maintained, every time I'd chosen isolation over risk. But here's what broke me. In that hug, I also felt how much my mother had known. How every Sunday when she'd called, she'd heard the loneliness underneath my words. How she'd recognized it because she'd felt it too. How the divorce that had happened when I was 12 had left her adrift in her own life, maintaining a cheerful exterior while drowning in isolation. She'd known, she'd seen me, and she'd never said anything because I didn't know how to say it without making it worse, she said. And I was hearing her voice for the first time in 7 years, and it was exactly as I remembered it. Warm, slightly raspy, patient. We weren't separate anymore. Or we were, but the boundaries were permeable. Her thoughts, my thoughts, they flowed between us like water. You were so lonely, I said, or thought, or felt, all those years after the divorce. You pretended everything was okay, but you were drowning. Yes, and you saw that I was doing the same thing. pushing people away, building walls. Yes. Why didn't we just... Because you were my daughter, and I wanted you to think I was strong, and because I was so deep in my own loneliness that I couldn't see a way out of it, couldn't offer you a path I hadn't found myself. The revelation shattered something in me, a fundamental assumption I'd been carrying my whole life, that loneliness was a personal failure, a character flaw, evidence that something was broken in me specifically. But it wasn't. It was inherited, passed down, a learned behavior I'd absorbed without even knowing it. I learned it from you, I said, and it wasn't an accusation, just an observation. You did. And I learned it from my mother, and she learned it from hers. We were a long line of women who convinced ourselves that needing others was weakness, that love meant always being strong, that showing cracks meant failure. Her arms tightened around me, and I was 7 years old again, and 27, and 34, all at once. I was every age I'd ever been, and my mother was every age she'd ever been, and we were finally being honest with each other. I'm so sorry, she said. For what? For not showing you that it was okay to need people. For modeling isolation instead of connection. For every time I said I'm fine when I was breaking. For making you think that being strong meant being alone. And then the real revelation hit me. The one that made everything else make sense. I wasn't lonely because I was unlovable. I was lonely because I'd never learned to let anyone in. Every person who'd tried to get close. Friends, romantic partners, even my sister. I'd pushed away at the first sign of real intimacy. Not consciously, not cruelly, but consistently, subtly, keeping everyone at the exact distance where they couldn't hurt me, but also couldn't truly know me. I'd thought I was protecting myself. I'd actually been building a prison. I died alone in that car, I said. No, my mother corrected gently. You lived alone in that life. There's a difference. I don't know how to change it. Yes, you do. You're doing it right now. She pulled back slightly so she could look at me. Really look at me. And her eyes were exactly as I remembered them. Kind. Sad. Knowing. Loneliness isn't a lack of people, she said. It's a lack of allowing yourself to be seen. Really seen. All the ugly, broken, frightened parts. The parts you've been hiding your whole life. I don't know if I can do that. You already are. Right now. With me. This moment. This honesty. This is what you've been running from. And it hasn't destroyed you, has it? I thought about it. The vulnerability I was feeling was intense, almost physically painful. But it wasn't destruction. It was the opposite. It was like I'd been carrying a tremendous weight my entire life, and someone had finally said, "You can put that down now." The question isn't whether you can do it, my mother continued. It's whether you're willing to. Whether you're willing to risk being hurt to find out what connection feels like. Real connection. Not the performance of it. The actual thing. What if I go back and nothing changes? What if I just slide back into... Then you remember this moment. You remember that loneliness is a choice, a habit. And like all habits, it can be broken. But you have to be conscious of it. You have to catch yourself building the walls and ask, why am I doing this? Who am I protecting? And what am I protecting myself from? The space around us was starting to shift. The light was dimming. Or not dimming, but receding. I could feel something pulling at me. Something insistent. My body, my life, the world I'd left behind. I don't want to leave you, I said, panic rising. You're not leaving me. I'm always with you. I always have been. But you have to go back now. You have work to do. What work? She smiled. Learning to live differently. Learning to be vulnerable. Learning to let people see you. That's terrifying. Yes, and necessary. And worth it. Trust me. The pulling sensation was getting stronger. I could feel my body again. Distantly. But definitely. The pain was returning. Sharp and real. A counterpoint to the weightless peace I'd been experiencing. Mom! I love you. I've always loved you. Even when you couldn't feel it. Even when you pushed me away. Even when you stood at my funeral and couldn't cry. I saw you. I saw all of it. And I loved you anyway. I love you too. I know. Show it. Not to me. I already know. Show it to the people who are still alive. Let them in. Let them know you. All of you. The real you. The light was fading completely now. My mother's form was becoming translucent, her features blurring, but I could still feel her presence, her love, her certainty that I was going to be okay. One more thing, she said, her voice growing distant. The loneliness you've been feeling, it's not just yours. Everyone is carrying some version of it. Every person who seems perfectly happy, perfectly connected, they have moments of loneliness too. You're not alone in feeling alone. Remember that. And then she was gone. And I was falling. And everything went white. The pain hit first. A full body scream of sensation. Crushed ribs, torn muscles, shattered bone. Every nerve ending firing at once, informing me in excruciating detail exactly how much damage had been done. I gasped, or tried to gasp, but there was a tube down my throat and I choked on it, panic flooding my system. She's awake! She's awake! Hands on my shoulders, gentle but firm, holding me down. Don't fight the tube. Let it breathe for you. You're okay. You're in the hospital. You're safe. I opened my eyes to fluorescent lights and white ceiling tiles and a nurse's face hovering above mine, concerned and professional. Can you hear me? Nod if you can hear me. I nodded. The movement sent lightning bolts of pain down my neck. Good. You were in a car accident. You've been unconscious for 6 hours. We have you on a ventilator temporarily, but we're going to remove it soon. You're going to be fine. Do you understand? I nodded again. Is there someone we can call, family, friends? I tried to speak, but the tube prevented it. I made a gesture, writing, and the nurse understood, produced a small whiteboard and marker. With shaking hands, I wrote, "My sister in Denver." Okay, we'll call her. Rest now. The doctor will be in soon. But I couldn't rest. I was back in my body and it hurt. Everything hurt. But underneath the pain was something else. Something new. Or maybe something ancient that I'd finally rediscovered. I was alive. Not just breathing, not just surviving. Alive, aware of it, grateful for it, terrified by it. The next few hours were a blur of medical procedures. Removal of the ventilator, X-rays, CT scans, doctors discussing my condition in terminology I only half understood. Fractured sternum, they confirmed. Broken ankle, severe contusions. Internal bleeding that had, miraculously, stopped on its own. A concussion. Countless lacerations. You're very lucky, one doctor said. Another few inches and the impact would have, well, you're very lucky. But I didn't feel lucky. I felt deliberate. Like I'd been sent back for a reason. Like my mother's hug hadn't just been a goodbye, but a commission. A task. My sister arrived just after midnight. I was dozing, half conscious on painkillers, when I heard her voice in the hallway. Where is she? She's stable. Room 247. Then she was in the doorway, and her face crumpled when she saw me. She crossed the room in 3 strides and grabbed my hand, careful to avoid the IV, tears streaming down her cheeks. Jesus Christ, Sarah, you scared the hell out of me. Sorry, I managed. My voice was rough from the ventilator tube. Don't apologize, just fuck, don't die, okay? I can't do another funeral, I can't. And there it was. The exact vulnerability I'd spent my whole life avoiding. My sister, admitting she needed me. Admitting that my absence would devastate her. Admitting that she was scared and hurt and barely holding it together. I squeezed her hand. I'm not going anywhere. Promise? Promise. She pulled a chair close to the bed and sat, still holding my hand, and we stayed like that for a long time, not talking, just being present, just letting the connection exist without performance or pretense. Eventually, she said, I got a call about 3 months ago, from your landlord. I frowned. What? He was worried about you. Said you never came out of your apartment, that your mail was piling up, that he'd knocked a few times and you'd answered, but you looked. His words, like a ghost. He wanted to know if I'd heard from you. Shame flooded through me. I'm sorry, I should have. Don't apologize. I'm not mad. I'm telling you because I should have come sooner. I should have called more. I knew you were struggling, but I was so caught up in my own life, my own stuff, that I let it go. I let you drift away. It wasn't your fault, and it wasn't yours either. But we both let it happen, didn't we? We both decided it was easier to be separate than to actually show up for each other. I thought about my mother's words. Loneliness isn't a lack of people. It's a lack of allowing yourself to be seen. I want to do better, I said. Me too. I mean it. I want to actually... I struggled to find the words. I want to let you in. Really in. Not just surface stuff. Not just everything's fine. The real stuff. The hard stuff. She smiled through her tears. I'd like that. I'm terrified. Yeah, me too. We talked for hours that night. Real talk. Honest talk. About our mother. About the loneliness we'd both inherited. About the ways we'd both been surviving instead of living. About the divorce that had fractured our family and the patterns we'd absorbed from it. About the walls we'd built and the price we'd paid for them. It hurt. God, it hurt. Like picking at an old wound that had healed incorrectly, that needed to be rebroken to heal right. But it was also freeing. Like finally putting down a weight I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten it was heavy. The days in the hospital blended together. Physical therapy for my ankle. Breathing exercises for my ribs. Slow, painful recovery. But through it all, something was different. The hospital room never felt empty, even when I was alone, because I'd stopped feeling separate from the world, stopped feeling like a ghost haunting my own life. Nurses would come to check vitals, and I'd ask them about their day. Really ask. Really listen. A physical therapist mentioned her daughter was struggling in school, and I told her about a learning method I'd discovered doing graphic design. An orderly mentioned he was taking online classes, and I offered to look at his resume. Small things. Nothing revolutionary. But each one was an opening. A willingness to connect. A choice to be present instead of absent. And every time I made that choice, I thought about my mother, about her arms around me, about the revelation she'd given me. That loneliness was learned, which meant it could be unlearned. My sister came every day. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we just sat together, her hand in mine, both of us healing in our own ways. On the 5th day, she brought my laptop. Thought you might want to work on some stuff, she said. Keep your mind occupied. I opened it expecting to feel the usual dread, the pile of unfinished projects, the inbox full of client emails I'd been avoiding. But instead, I felt something else. Excitement, maybe, or purpose, or just interest. I opened my design software and looked at the project I'd been working on before the crash. A logo for a small business. A bakery owned by a woman who'd sent me photos of her shop, her cakes, her vision. I'd done the work mechanically, producing something technically correct but emotionally empty. Now I looked at it with new eyes. This woman had a story. She had dreams. She'd sent me all those photos because this bakery meant something to her, and I'd given her the graphic design equivalent of a shrug. I started over. This time, I thought about what it must feel like to pour yourself into creating something, to offer it to the world, to hope people would see the love in it. I thought about vulnerability, about risk, about the courage it takes to open a business, to say this is my dream, and trust that others will value it. I designed from that place, and the result was completely different. Warmer, more human, more true. I sent it to the client with a message. I'm sorry the previous versions weren't right. I wasn't seeing what you were really asking for. I hope this is closer. She responded within an hour. This is perfect. This is exactly it. How did you know? I didn't know how to answer that. How could I explain that I died and met my mother and learned that loneliness was a choice, and that revelation had somehow made me a better designer? So I just said, I'm glad you like it. But I knew that something fundamental had shifted, that I was engaging with the world differently, that I was finally allowing myself to care about things, to be affected by things, to be vulnerable to things. And that made all the difference. On the day I was discharged, my sister drove me back to my apartment. We stood in the doorway together, looking at the space I'd been existing in for the past several years. The mail on the dining table, the kitchen counter where I'd eaten standing up, the couch I'd sat on scrolling through my phone, killing time, killing days, killing life. We should clean this place up, my sister said. Yeah, but what I was really thinking was, I should live here, not just occupy it. Live. Can you stay for a while? I asked. How long? I don't know. A few days? A week? I don't want to be alone right now." She looked at me, surprised and pleased. "Of course. I'll call work, rearrange some stuff, as long as you need." And so she did. She stayed. We cleaned the apartment together, throwing out old mail and expired food and the general detritus of a life half-lived. We cooked actual dinners and ate at the dining table, talking and laughing and sometimes crying as we processed everything that had happened. We called our father. Our parents might be divorced, but that didn't mean he stopped being our dad, and told him about the accident. He drove up the next day, awkward and worried, and the three of us sat together in my newly cleaned living room and talked about our family in a way we never had before. About the loneliness that had infected all of us, about the patterns we'd inherited, about the silence we'd maintained for decades out of some misguided attempt at strength. "Your mother struggled with this too," Dad said quietly. "Even before we divorced. Maybe especially before. She loved you girls so much, but she had this wall. I could never quite reach her all the way. And then after the divorce, I think she just gave up trying. Decided it was safer to be alone." "I've been doing the same thing," I admitted. "Me too," my sister said. Dad nodded. "We all have, I think. Different versions, different walls, same result." "Can we change it?" I asked. He smiled, sad but hopeful. "You're changing it right now." 6 months after the crash, I'm still learning how to be vulnerable. It doesn't come naturally. The old habits are strong. The instinct to say, "I'm fine," when I'm not. To smile through pain. To maintain the performance of having everything together. It's still there. Whispering that opening up is dangerous. That people will hurt you. That isolation is safer. But now I recognize the whisper for what it is. Fear wearing the mask of wisdom. And I make a different choice. I call my sister once a week. Not with an agenda. Not because something's wrong. Just to connect. To hear her voice. To tell her about my day. The real version. Not the edited one. Sometimes we talk about nothing. Sometimes we talk about everything. But we talk. We stay connected. I joined a book club, which sounds insignificant, but for me it was revolutionary. A room full of strangers, meeting weekly, discussing stories, sharing opinions. The first meeting, I almost didn't go. Stood outside the door for 5 minutes, heart racing, finding excuse after excuse to leave. But I heard my mother's voice. "Let people see you." So I went in. And it was awkward at first. I was rusty at social interaction, too eager or too reserved, never quite hitting the right note. But the group was patient. They'd all been new once. They understood. Now, 6 months later, I have friends. Real friends. People who know things about me. Who've seen me cry over a particularly emotional book passage. Who've heard me laugh too loud. Who've watched me struggle to articulate why a character's choice bothered me and helped me find the words. I'm learning that intimacy isn't one grand gesture. It's 1,000 small choices to be honest instead of guarded. To say I'm struggling instead of I'm fine. To ask for help instead of pretending I don't need it. My graphic design work has changed too. I take fewer projects but invest more in each one. I talk to my clients, really talk to them, about their visions and dreams and fears. I let myself care about the outcomes, and the work is better for it. Richer, more human. Last month, a client told me, "You don't just design logos, you understand people." I thought about my mother, about the hug that exposed my deepest loneliness, about the gift she'd given me in that space between life and death. "I'm learning to," I said. "The truth is, I still have hard days. Days when the apartment feels too quiet. Days when I want to retreat behind my walls and shut out the world. Days when the old loneliness creeps back in like fog. But now I know what to do with those feelings. I call my sister. I text a friend from book club. I go to the coffee shop down the street and chat with the barista about his day. I choose connection instead of isolation. And slowly, so slowly, I barely notice it happening. I'm becoming a different version of myself. Not perfect, not cured, but present, engaged, alive in a way I haven't been since I was a child. Sometimes I think about the crash, about how close I came to dying without ever really living, about how the truck that hit me was both an ending and a beginning. And I think about my mother, waiting in the light, knowing that I needed to almost die to finally understand how to live. The loneliness I carried for so long, the loneliness she carried, that her mother carried, that had been passed down like a family curse. It didn't disappear in that moment we embraced, but it was exposed, named, understood, and understanding it gave me power over it. I'm not lonely anymore. Not because I'm never alone. I am often. But because I know the difference now between solitude and isolation. Solitude is peaceful. It's choosing to spend time with yourself. Isolation is prison. It's building walls so high that no one can reach you and convincing yourself you prefer it that way. I spent 34 years in that prison. I'm not going back. Last week, I did something I'd been too afraid to do for 7 years. I visited my mother's grave. My sister came with me. We stood there in the cemetery, looking at her name carved in granite, and I told her everything. About the crash, about the NDE, about the hug, about what Mom had told me. Do you think it was real? My sister asked. Or was it just your brain shutting down, creating meaning where there wasn't any? I thought about it. Does it matter? I guess not. Real or not, it changed me. That's what matters. We stood there a while longer, and then I did something I should have done 7 years ago. I cried. Really cried. All the grief I'd been holding back. All the loss. All the missed opportunities for connection. It poured out of me and I let it. My sister held me while I sobbed, and when I was done, she said, I miss her too. I know, but I'm glad I have you. Me too. We left flowers, the same kind Mom used to grow in her garden, and walked back to the car. The sun was setting, painting the sky in colors that would have been too bright, too obvious in a painting, but were perfect in reality. And I thought, this is what she wanted for me. This moment, this connection, this willingness to feel everything, pain and joy and loss and love, instead of numbing it all into gray nothing. If you're reading this, if somehow my story has found its way to you, I want you to know something. You're not alone in your loneliness. It's a paradox, isn't it? Feeling isolated in a world full of people. But it's incredibly common, maybe even universal. Everyone is carrying some version of it, hiding it behind smiles and busy schedules and I'm fines. But it doesn't have to be permanent. Loneliness is a habit, a learned behavior, a wall you built to protect yourself that became a prison. And like all habits, it can be changed, but you have to choose to change it. You have to catch yourself building the walls and ask, why? Who am I protecting? And what am I protecting myself from? And then, this is the hard part, you have to risk being seen, really seen. All the broken, frightened, imperfect parts you've been hiding. You have to let people in. It's terrifying. I know. I've been there. I'm still there some days. But I'm here to tell you it's worth it. Connection is worth it. Vulnerability is worth it. Living, really living, not just surviving, is worth it. My mother taught me that in the moment between death and life, between one existence and another. She showed me that the loneliness I'd been carrying wasn't a character flaw or a permanent condition, but a choice I'd been making without realizing it. And she showed me how to make a different choice. So if you're lonely, if you're reading this and feeling like you're the only one who doesn't fit, who doesn't connect, who doesn't belong, please know, you do belong. You do matter. Your presence in this world makes a difference, even if you can't see it yet. And the walls you've built, they feel like safety, but they're not. They're keeping out the very thing you need most, connection. So take a risk. Call someone you've been avoiding. Tell someone how you really feel. Ask for help. Admit you're struggling. Show someone the real you, messy and imperfect and frightened. Choose vulnerability over isolation. Choose connection over safety. Choose life over survival. I almost died to learn this lesson. You don't have to. You can learn it right now, in this moment, by making one small choice toward openness instead of closure. And if you do, if this story has touched something in you, if you see yourself in my struggle, I'd love for you to share it. Not for me, but for all the other lonely people out there who need to hear that they're not alone in feeling alone. We're all in this together, even when it doesn't feel like it. We're all stumbling toward connection, one vulnerable moment at a time. And that's beautiful. That's human. That's enough. My mother's last words to me were, "Show them, let them see you." So here I am, seen, vulnerable, imperfect, alive, and inviting you to do the same. May you find the courage to open your walls. May you find people who deserve to see what's inside. May you discover, as I did, that the loneliness you've been carrying can be set down. May you learn that love, real love, messy and complicated and risky, is worth every moment of fear it costs. And may you always remember, you are not alone. Even in your loneliest moments, you are not alone. I see you, and so would my mother. Welcome home.